Alright, hey guys, it's been a few days. Doing Deuteronomy 14, 15, and I started in 16. And like you know, I'm not really doing in this particular study, I'm not really doing a verse by verse explanation of everything that's going on in the chapter. Uh, what I'm really doing is I'm going through and I'm just seeing where it is that God points me, what it is that He's kind of pointing me to. And in this case, in each of the chapters, there was kind of a verse or two that really didn't hit me as to what was going on until I got to 16. And like in verse 15, he's talking about bondmen and slaves and so on and so forth, and how they're not supposed to be in servitude for more than 6 years. And he tells them in chapter 15, verse 15, "And thou shalt remember that thou wast a bondman in the land of Egypt, and the Lord thy God redeemed thee. Therefore I command thee this thing today." And then again in verse 16, or in chapter 16, verse 1, it says, "Observe the month of Abib, and keep the Passover unto the Lord thy God, for in the month of Abib the Lord thy God brought thee forth out of Egypt by night." And then verse 3, "Thou shalt eat no unleavened bread with it. 7 days shalt thou eat unleavened bread therewith, even the bread of affliction, for thou camest forth out of the land of Egypt in haste, and thou mayest remember the day when thou camest forth out of the land of Egypt all the days of thy life." And the thing that comes to mind is that God is constantly reminding them to have remembrance towards the things that He's brought them through, to have remembrance towards their time in Egypt and all this, and He's constantly drawing their attention to the fact that these things had occurred and that God had redeemed them out of the land, and that He's not just to remember for His sake, but for others' sake as well. They remember their servitude so that they don't put others in bondage. They remember their trials and tribulations so that their faith continues to grow because God brought them through it. He's constantly reminding them of these things, and it brings to mind something that I've heard a couple different pastors say at different times, and that is regarding like a prayer log. And the idea of a prayer log is that you write down the things that you're praying, and I believe it was George Mueller who really kind of, I'm not going to say invented it, but he's really famous for having done it. I mean, he could remember what he prayed on the day. I mean, he literally had a diary full of what his prayers were that day. And the purpose of this is so that as you're praying for these things, later on as time goes by, you see God answer those prayers. And that really, in turn, begins to strengthen your faith, but also build that relationship with God, and constantly is reminding you that you really do have this interaction with God, that it really is a two-way relationship. And that was something that had just really stood out in my head. So something you might want to give a try to. See if a prayer log, one way or another, even if God doesn't answer your prayers in the way that you expect, sometimes even that non-answered prayer is an answer to prayer. It is a response from God as to He doesn't want you going this direction, or He does want you going this direction. But it's still something, it's still an answer, and it's still that conversation that we have between ourselves and God. So anyway, I want to share that with you guys. God bless.